Greetings to everyone who decided to join my channel today. This is Divine Destiny of Souls and episode 9. So in this first series of episodes, I'm continuing to tell the story of my shamanic awakening. I ended my previous episode describing how we started to live together with Polly and trying to navigate our new reality where we were spiritually bonded by the contract that we signed with the seashell spirits. And one of the most important things in this contract was that Polly was sort of spiritually chained to me without the possibility to change any of it or end this arrangement until everything would be solved and resolved. And at first it was fine for Polly. Then of course she kind of like battled with that because it's a strange predicament for both of us, and she kind of like understood how much she takes from me, how much she asks from me, and how much is required to complete this healing process. And so it's important to describe the process of healing and how we sort of slowly started to create the practice that I have right now of healing souls of people. And it all started with healing Polly and myself. But Polly was sort of the one who created the essence of our practice, let's say it like that, because she needed specific healing, and it was clear that there is something that we need to figure out about my design, about our shared design, that would advance that. And initially I was kind of under the impression that if I'm clearing out her past lives, the full result will only manifest in her next life, that she's already trapped in the circumstances that were created in the past lives, and that's why sort of Jessica was in this situation. And the other thing is that the nature of the curse that Damien placed upon Polly was that not only that he wanted to hunt her and sort of like had the ability to kill her and wanted to sort of take her soul into his realm, and there was also this element that because of this curse, it prevented Polly from sort of seeing my love and also recognizing her own love for myself or for anybody else. And it was the same sort of in our previous 4 lives, and that's kind of when she questioned my love and when she couldn't like see it because of the curse, it would always lead to her tragic death. So this was the sort of the nature how this curse worked. And for me, it was sort of evident that that's why Jessica couldn't recognize my love, the honesty of my feelings, and that it was unconditional feeling, and that I didn't actually wanted anything from her. I just wanted to express that love in any way that she would sort of allow me to. And the main way is to, of course, just advance her healing and make her empowered in her purpose, and just lead the life that she has without traumatizing herself further or without traumatizing her clients. That was her natural purpose and that was her natural design. She couldn't be anybody else. But at the same time, with all these past traumas, it was clear that they have created the conditions where she sort of damaged her energy body to the extent that she did, and that it was leading to all sorts of troubles. And the other thing, important thing that I discovered during the course of my practice and sort of developing it and healing Polly, is that I realized that sort of Jessica couldn't feel the boundaries of her clients, and she couldn't feel her own boundaries because of the traumas of the soul. I didn't know that that was the case, but then later on, I met other 2 of my soulmates, including my twin flame, and they both had the same challenge, is that they just couldn't feel what would be the most empowering for them, but also like couldn't sense that from the clients. And how I understand the natural design of sex workers that are created upon birth is that nature empowered them to sort of feel these things and sense these things. They kind of like gifted spiritually differently than the majority of women, because they have a different missions in life, and they have kind of commitments to nature to serve her with their bodies, with their special purpose, and to provide spiritual healing through sex work. And so sort of just generally, when the couple is empowered, when there is no like these traumas, both partners kind of feel what the other like, or they can sense it. Even if they don't talk, they kind of like could discover it through just intuition and through kind of just being in each other's presence. And all of my soulmates couldn't do that because of the traumas of the soul, and that's why it created more traumas for them without them sort of realizing all of that. And so that right now sort of became one of the main things of my practice. This is something that I offer to sex workers and to other people. And also the other sort of result of my healing that I discovered only later on, and I can confidently say that this is one of the things that I sort of help women with, is that to advance their intuition and to trust it. Because the intuition is the main sort of spiritual talent of women, but because of the past traumas of the soul, tragic deaths and different other situations, souls kind of start to question their intuition, start to question their path and how they lead women. And so that kind of manifests that woman physically also sort of questions her intuition and doesn't trust it. And most of the clients who reported any results, that's the main result that they always tell me once we sort of complete their past life healings, their soul healing journeys. And so for me, it was kind of like this idea when I started Polish healing and when I started doing these practices, that was that possible that if I would heal the soul, a woman sort of would feel her boundaries and sense the boundaries of her lovers in the most empowering way, because I couldn't sort of accept how damaged Jessica was, to the point that I met her and like she was very young, to be able to be so kind of like so tortured by these past instances. And for me, it was kind of like this idea is that like, yeah, one thing is that I can potentially heal the results of it already, but whether that was something that could be prevented or could be avoided, that was sort of one of my questions. And I kind of like discovered that it is, and that if sort of a woman is healed from those spiritual ailments, it comes more naturally for her to create the most empowering offerings in sex work, and also sort of just feel the clients differently and just sense what each man is like. Because the sort of the needs, including sexual needs, by any other needs, they're very individual. You can't really like blanketly say that all men wants this or they would be empowered through this. But also kind of it's important for women to also sense that the clients are different, and some of them may just benefit from conversations, from like dinner dates, from walks in the park, with where they explore different kinds of intimacy, not specifically sex and special penetrative sex. There are also other sort of abilities to exchange sexual energies without sort of full intimacy, and all of that is possible. And also it's important to sort of sense what client is looking for, and it can actually an empowered woman would always feel that she doesn't need to sort of ask a client. It's of course better if they able to speak their truth and if they able to present their perceptions and how they think these, like any of these sessions may be constructed, but also like I know that women can sort of sense that with their intuition without men telling them. And of course, some of the clients come specifically for that. There is like no issue, no question about it. But even if that's the case, there still may be kind of like steps towards it, rather than just immediately jump into this space. It was also this cultural thing that keeps confusing me on these lands, and that I trying to get used to or adapt, is that I see that women, not only sex workers, but women that I interacted with outside of that world, they are kind of, they rush sexual part to the sexual part quite often, and I couldn't sort of understand that and couldn't sort of accept it, because it just doesn't come naturally for a woman to sort of move to that space to penetrative sex quite soon in the connection with a man. There is no reason for that, and it's not natural for a woman, and it's not natural for a man equally. And the sort of one of the traumas that I described to you, emotional traumas, is that in the first date with Jessica, the shift from dinner to the in-call and to the intimacy happened too quickly for my nervous system to catch up. And that kind of like, even though it was an initiation, we need to went through this. Just in general, I would prefer things not to be this way, and I would prefer to sort of have more space and time to be able to settle into the space. And that's actually the nature of every man. They kind of experience things differently mentally and emotionally compared to women. And so if a woman needs time in foreplay and in sort of time outside of the bedroom to get ready to the bedroom, and she needs more time for foreplay when it goes to intimacy, with touch, with energy exchanges, with breathing exercises, to kind of like to allow her body to unravel and allow her body to sort of fully immerse into the space and surrender to the intimacy that would unravel. For the man, this time is also important because this is where he settles into space mentally and emotionally. For a man, it's very hard to get to their emotions. They're not that readily available as in women. And so that kind of like always creates this sort of situation. And kind of physically, yes, men seem to be ready for sex quite soon. After any arousal would start, or after some kissing and touching, they would like seem to be ready physically, but it's actually sort of not the most empowering way. If you sort of proceed, it would be better if the man has space to sort of to help women to unravel physically, and while he's sort of doing that, he also surrenders to what will come later on. And because it's all rushed both by men and women, but mostly for women, by women in this culture, I see a lot of men who sort of never had empowered sex in their 30s, in their 40s, even later on, maybe in life, I'm not sure. I see men who never experienced full body orgasm because of that, because when a man is settled into like mental and emotional state and has this like a time of foreplay and being engaged with woman, his entire body sort of gets ready and his sexual energy starts to move from his genital area to his heart space and to his mind. And this is how sort of we designed, is that intimacy or love or feelings originate in woman in her heart, and the arousal also is being initiated in her heart, and so she needs that time of a foreplay to be able to move that energy into her genitals to prepare them and to sort of open up her womb space for that. But for man, because his arousal and his sort of love and expression of love are being initiated in the space of genitals, it's important for him to have time and space and a presence and the devotion of a woman to be able to move that energy upwards to his heart. And so once they sort of align that, right, like woman aligns her energies and man aligns his energies, then they can sort of engage in a powerful sexual exchange. And it's also, in my personal opinion, it's important to get to know a person, to sort of understand them energetically, understand them spiritually, maybe understand their personality as well, to sort of be able to see who's in front of you, and that makes empowering connection, like empowering sex, more sort of more reachable, let's say it like that. And in the space of sex work, it's also kind of, the time is always limited, so in my mind I see the most empowering sexual healing arts being performed like that, is that there are a series of sessions before the actual sex happens. And most of my sort of perceptions about the spiritual design of sex work and how to do that work empowerably comes from my life as a sex worker. I was a sex worker. My soul lived a life of a sexual priestess in ancient Egypt, and that was the time where there were like sexual healing arts, temples of sexual healing arts, and that's where Cassandra worked. And she specifically said that like in the temple space, the sex itself was probably like 20% of the time that they would spend with clients. It was more about discovering intimacy for a client, and discovering intimacy means discovering intimacy with yourself first and foremost, and kind of like settling into that and understanding what it is inside of you. And again, because men are notorious, like this is just their design, that they need time and space to be able to settle into their emotions and to understand actually what would be the most empowering thing for them. They need this guidance of a woman who would sort of allow them the space, because the bedroom is specifically woman's space and the space of sexual priestess of love, and this is where sort of her domain is. And of course she can only lead both partners to empowerment and to sort of any kind of spiritual enlightenment or reaching highest place of consciousness if she is in charge of guiding a man in that space. And so that's why it was kind of always understood that this is how men are. And one of the examples that I can sort of bring about myself is that when I kind of trying to understand like one specific need, for example, that I have, I would kind of, because I have limited access to sex, I don't have that much money to be able to do this work, and then also women here are not available to me because of my social status and of my sort of looks. I'm not sort of a person that women sort of look in the bars, and I'm also like not the person who can provide what they want financially, and so I'm kind of, let's say, excluded from the real dating market. The only place for me to be able to sort of find empowerment in sex only through sex work. That's just how it is, and I kind of like no other options for me exist. And so I was trying to understand what I actually sort of need, and because of the limited access to sex, I'm kind of always, I just need sex itself, right? Like, and that's what I'm striving for. And then when I was able to sort of spend time with that alone and kind of like process it, what do I actually need at that moment that I specifically describe, it took me some time to understand that I was actually craving for touch, and touch of the different forms, and touch throughout the entire body, not in the areas of genitals. And it was kind of like a big revelation to me, because I was just not knowing that part about myself, and that this is something that I kind of like throughout my life have sort of limited access to, or like it wasn't just happening with my partners, that like I didn't receive that enough, let's say it like that, right? And so, but I needed that space to be able to sort of understand that. And the idea behind sort of sexual priestess is that if you would come to her and kind of like start to sort of engage and start to talk about the intimacy and trying to discover these facets of you that needs to be explored, that she would help you to get there, right? Like that she would not sort of jump or take you right to the bed, but she would also but she would instead try to sort of like see maybe this is not something that you need right away, or maybe there are some other things that you sort of need to explore that you didn't have a chance to explore with partner, or maybe that you, for example, I just didn't recognize that need up until like I sort of started to live alone, right? So this is something that, and it's just one of the examples. It can be many other different things that can be sort of understood. So for me, for example, the most interesting part right now is that like to explore different like sensory practices, like body mapping and stuff like that, where you kind of just recognize what you feel and how you sort of respond to touch. There were also different other sort of energy practices, breathing practices and exercises that I discovered that were beneficial to me that I didn't know about, and that sort of the space with yourself, and the space where you are being heard by sexual priestess and you're being guided to most empowerment, because sexual priestess is supposed to understand the needs of man and their design. She's supposed to understand intimacy. She's supposed to understand that most people are growing through relationship. Like one of the main sort of things that people receive spiritual growth is the relationship. It's the main sort of way to advance, because the relationship, often any kind of relationship, friendship or like relatives, and of course romantic relationship or intimate relationship, they all help us advance in different forms, because we kind of they often highlight our blind spots, and they often sort of like bring to the surface something that may be even triggering to us, but that's something that needs to be worked through. And sort of this is why I personally, for example, really try to engage in any relationship that are being presented on my way, on my path, for that specific reason, because I kind of understand that. And the entire idea of sort of intimacy coaching and sort of this empowering work that sexual priestesses did in the temples is that they recognized that, and that was their main product that they sold. They didn't sell sex, so even empowering sexual healing practices, they mostly sold relationship. Because they knew that the man who come to see them, that's how they sort of grow, and that's how they sort of advance on their spiritual path and into their fulfilling their most empowering purpose in life. And when the relationships have this like an intimate dynamic involved with sexuality, involved with touch, it's very sort of personal, it's very sort of interpersonal as well. There is a high possibility to kind of like advance quickly, and especially sort of if a sexual priestess is guiding a man, it can happen much quicker, because she understands what love is, what relationship is, and what intimacy actually is. And that's why that's what they mainly sold in their temples. And because sexual priestesses understood that this is what sort of man needs to get to their empowerment and to their purpose, they try to present themselves and offer different kinds of practices and also different kinds of engagements outside of the bedroom as well, equally in the real world, on different dates or just walks, is that man would explore the woman in this way, and sort of this will help him to see facets of her inside of him. And it's also kind of like was always understood in these temples that each woman who works there, she represents different goddess, different light. So it was always decided on based on her soul purpose, of course, and her essence. But each woman who worked at such a temple, she would be initiated into like sort of the highest design of different goddess. And so, for example, because I'm by my soul purpose, when Cassandra came to the temple, she was initiated into energies of Isis, goddess, at that time. And so she represented that light through her work. So there were also other women, right? So there were Magdalene women in the temple, there were Hathor women, there were women of other different goddesses of or essences of souls, and each woman, of course, would sort of carry that essence in the relationship with her clients. So basically, if a client would need to be like a judge or need to govern other people, he would benefit from engaging specifically with a woman who's initiated into Isis energies, because with her he would be exploring what it means to be a goddess series and sort of like integrating that energies through him. These are the most empowering sexual healing practices. It's like it's an advanced work, and you can only sort of get there if you have steps towards it. But basically, by interacting with Cassandra in different kind of forms, he could, and seeing her under different moods and under different circumstances, on different days and in her different essences, he could sort of understand what it means to be a series, because he would be a series next to her, and then he would sort of integrate those energies after they would complete their journey, and they would allow him to sort of shine better in his profession. And then, of course, if he would need sort of to advance further, he can explore women with different other goddesses' purposes, so to like sort of to be their consort and to understand what it means to be a different man, right? So this is how sort of it was designed. And Cassandra specifically said that for her, it was never about like sort of single session with a client. It was always healing journeys with a client, right? So it takes time to unravel into presence of another person, and it takes time to sort of understand the dynamic and how to do that empoweringly. But initially, when I started this work, of course, I still didn't know about my past lives as a sex worker. I actually had 2 past lives as a sex worker, and I only discovered them probably like 18 months after we signed up the contract with Seashell Spirits. And so at that period of time in 2021, most of the things that I discovered about myself and about my needs and about my sort of design and about the different sexual healing exercises or practices that would empower me, I discovered them through Polly. She was sort of always passionate about trying to understand that design, and she was sort of reaching out to find that information anywhere she could. Some of it came to us sort of in a channeling sessions. Some of it came to us basically through our energy exchanges, because she wasn't a physical being, right? Like she was just existing as a soul ethereal being. And so our kind of like intimacy was happening in the spiritual realm mainly, and sometimes they were complemented with self-pleasuring practices and rituals, sometimes not. But I was trying to see what I could sort of like get from that spiritual realm and translate that into physical, and see how that can sort of be presented in the relationship with a real woman, but also kind of what would be the most empowering design of the sex work and sexual healing arts. And then she was also starting to, like with her intuition, started to guide me to discover different books. And then we, of course, discovered, with the help of Goddess Mary Magdalene, she guided Polly to discover the book with her teachings on intimacy and sort of like tantric practices. I don't really like to use word tantra in this culture and in this language, because it was clearly corrupted, and it's like evident, the level of corruption is quite evident, and it's not the tantra that sort of brings the empowerment to people. It's like the same sort of sex that's abusive for both partners in the way that it's sort of presented in most cases in Western society. There are, of course, teachers and practices that are still sort of honor the original design, but for most part it's not something that I kind of like try to use that word for. I prefer to use the word sexual alchemy, that was sort of closer to what Cassandra would explain, sexual healing arts, and these exchanges. So this book and a couple other books, they gave us this like foundation to sort of just understand my facets, my needs, my sort of design, and kind of like see what I can develop moving further on, and possibly to just create, I don't know, like the practice for myself. And I didn't really want it to develop something, like to be a practitioner. I just wanted to have something that I could practice with my future partner, whoever that might be, and kind of like give this knowledge to sex workers so they could sort of establish better practices for themselves, and explain to their clients the benefits of all the things that I'm sort of describing here. And so without Polly, it would not be sort of possible. That was part of our healing journey as well, her discovering all these things and trying, like being passionate about it, trying to understand how nature created sex workers, what the sex magic is, what sexual alchemy is, all these things, how they can be sort of empowering for both men and women to bring them spiritual enlightenment and to advance their sort of advance them to live more empowering lives, more healthy lives, and just charge their energy bodies as well. And the other element of our healing was, of course, the past life regressions that we were engaged with Camilla. And we basically, since January 2021, we had a session every 3-4 weeks, because we could see how much work needed to be done, and sort of like most information about Damien we discovered through these sessions, and most healing that was done, it was done through these regression sessions. And over the course of like, I think 2.5 years, we did 33 past life regressions with Camilla, so basically every single month. Half of that sessions were into life of Thomas Jefferson and Polly Jefferson. That was sort of the biggest traumas of our souls, and they were the most traumatizing embodiments of our entire journey of souls. And of course, at a certain point I was in complete denial, because it took too much from me. It was a lot of tears, both from Polly and both from Thomas. And in most cases I couldn't endure. I didn't see the point of continuing. It was sort of like a big struggle. But then Camilla was very supportive and very sort of passionate to discover everything that it is and heal Thomas in the way that we could. And we started to have like these conversations with him as well. He would like summon us not to just heal his grief, because he lost his wife when she was only 33, and he could never sort of recover from that. And then he lost Polly when he was a president, and that was sort of completely devastated him. And he basically, when he returned from presidency, he sort of a little bit lost his mind. He kind of like created this trap for himself where he believed that Polly is alive. She just lives with her husband in a different sort of place in Virginia, in their farm, in their plantation. And he kept like sort of living in this denial and up until his death, and that those griefs were never processed. And it was also sort of important to understand that Thomas Jefferson was the same way as I am. He was a clairvoyant shaman, so he could see the souls of people and he could see their energies. And so when Martha, his wife, died when she was 33, shortly after, her soul started to come to Thomas and talk with him, and she stayed with him up until almost the end of his life. And just like sort of talking to him, channeling, helping him with writings and helping him with different things, exactly like we were living with Polly. And during the time, it was sort of the same sort of rhyming reality for me. So to address all these spiritual ailments of Thomas, we needed to sort of explain to him what he was going through. And of course, it's like important to understand that everything that happened to him was empowered by grief, and his entire life was sort of like shaped by that grief. He also sort of lost 4 of his children in infancy. Martha gave birth to 6 children altogether. Only 2 survived to adulthood, and Polly died when she was 25. So it was a lot of that in his life, and it was sort of the main thing that kind of like shaped his entire existence and shaped his entire sort of even decision making. Like, for example, he was convinced that he would not return to politics after sort of his time as a governor and after his time in the Continental Congress. He wanted to spend as much time as possible with his wife and with their children and just live like that, and maybe do some writings and do gardening, which he loved the most. And sort of that was the reason why the soul of Martha Jefferson chose to die at that moment, because she knew that he needed to, like, he had this like a purpose of not only writing the Declaration of Independence, but bringing its existence into life. And it would not be achievable if he wouldn't become president. And he didn't want to be president at all. He didn't want to have any sort of like a political career at all at that time. And so her soul died. Her soul chose to die, so he would be sort of freed from spending time with her, and that she would be with him wherever he would go, right? Like if he would go to Washington or Philadelphia or to Paris, she would sort of accompany him because she was sort of existing as a soul, and she was always with him, and he could talk to her. And that was the entire purpose. And when she died and her soul arrived, that's what she told him, is that you need to get out of here and you need to sort of explore the world, and you need to make actions. You need to create this the idea of Declaration of Independence into the physical realm, because she was basically the female, Martha Jefferson was basically the female principle of the Declaration of Independence. She inspired Thomas to write it. She birthed that document into existence. She was the one who sort of explained to Thomas what she feels this country could be. All that knowledge was channeled to her by the land and by the skies. She was talking to angels, she was talking to trees, she was talking to the land herself, and like she basically, she couldn't explain to him like legal or philosophical concept, but she was like just talking about the life that she thinks that people should live. And that of course was the main thing, is that personal liberation and the end of system of slavery. That was the only thing to kind of like to help her, and that allowed her to understand that this was something alienable for people and given to them by the Creator, their freedom, their liberty, their life. And it shouldn't be like that, that not only that all Americans were slaves to British Empire, but that also these Americans had also their own slaves. So all of that kind of produce these conversations that they often would have during the evenings that would lead to creation of or declaration of independence. But for Martha, it was also important to kind of like bring that document into reality, because she knew that only Thomas could do that. And so when she died, he kept sort of insisting on the fact that I'll still stay here in the Monticello mansion and just like spend time with my daughters. And Martha kept telling him that like, no, there is another sort of destiny for him to explore. And she kind of like insisted for him to go to Paris to be the ambassador. And then when he kind of became a president, he was completely rejecting that role. He didn't like that position. He didn't like that everybody sort of asked for his opinions. He felt trapped. He felt kind of like almost enslaved by the system, where like the entire sort of collective consciousness was guiding him to do these things. And so when he in his first few months of presidency, kind of like, I'm not going to do the second term. I'm just going to go back to my mansion and to spend time with my daughters. And especially he missed spending time with Polly, because she was his favorite person in the world, because they were soulmates, right? Like they were of the same soul essence. They were part of the one soul being. And when Polly died in 1804, he, of course, he was the last person who held her hand, and he was the one who buried her. And it was the same for us in sort of every life, that I had to hold the hand of Polly's embodiments in every single life, and I had to bury her. That was sort of the arrangement between our souls, and this is how we sort of come to empowerment. And so after he buried her, he didn't want to stay in Monticello because he didn't want to experience that grief. And that was the only reason why he ran for presidency for the second term. So basically, if Martha Jefferson wouldn't die and Polly Jefferson wouldn't die, Thomas would not do what he did, and there would be like a completely different country, and probably most likely the independent America would not become a reality, because all the other sort of parties were not in favor of that, especially Alexander Hamilton, that he was sort of the main nemesis of Thomas, and they sort of fight in this realm. And it was important to also understand that Alexander Hamilton lost his soul, and when he did, Damien took control of his body, and that's why it was all constant these clashes between Thomas and Alexander Hamilton. And because only Polly could sort of defeat Damien, when she died, she arranged the murder of Alexander Hamilton, and he died in the same year, just 3 months after her death. And that also cleared the pathway for Thomas to sort of win the elections. Without that death, he would probably not win that election and would not be able to first completely make illegal the slave trade, and then also expand America with Louisiana Purchase, because only he could do that by the natural design, by the higher design. So we untangled all of these things through the series of these past life regressions, but at the same time, quite quickly I realized that I have this ability to be able to just go into trance state myself and see any sort of pieces or images or visions from past lives that sort of I was missing. It's I find it's a great benefit for in past life regressions that you can talk through the traumas that you experienced. You can talk through the feelings that these people experienced in the past. So that was kind of like one element, but also just being able to go directly into these visions and to sort of to retrieve the missing elements was also something that I kind of quickly discovered as my design, the same way that I kind of could just descend into that vision before the second date with Jessica and to see how Camilla and Eloise sort of fell in love with each other and made love for the first time, I could just naturally see that on my own without the help of the guide or without the help of the regression therapist. And when I kind of understood that design, I started to explore it more and more, what I could do. And then also, I quite soon, there were occasional souls that would come into my space with like different requests or different like guidance that they asked for. And we tried to provide that guidance with Polly in the most empowering ways. And I would have to say that most souls that come into my space, they receive enough guidance just as souls. Some of them ask me to relate some of the information to the physical bodies, and that's what I was also like sort of started to do at that time. During 2021, I would just like come to people and basically tell them if I would had some images of their past lives or whatever knowledge that their souls wanted to pass to them, or like any sort of spiritual ailments that they should address. And in some cases, it was mostly kind of like understanding the design, understanding the essence and archetype of a soul. And that knowledge, if I sort of relate it to a person, can sort of help them reconcile with their story, understand that some past parts of their journey in life, the fate that they lived, are unavoidable because of what their souls chose, because of their design of their souls, because the purpose of their souls. But in some cases, I would actually see the visions of their past death and visions of their past traumatic deaths, usually, because they kind of like, this is what my natural soul design is supposed to do, is to untangle these things and explain to souls why they die in traumatic way. And sort of quite soon I realized that the purpose of these deaths was always the initiation of a soul into their higher design. And so the person, when a soul dies tragically in one life, in the next life they would have more spiritual talents because of that traumatic death. But oftentimes that traumatic death also would create a veils and like a mist, a cloud for the soul, and so that would kind of like impede the life of a person. Without them like knowing, it would create like sort of anxieties, it would create unexplainable emotions, tormenting like kind of like feelings, and they would not be able to understand what it is. But it was basically a soul would leave part of themselves in that tragic death and that traumatic experience, and sort of, if I would be able to process that death together with a soul, we could retrieve those pieces back to the soul. And sort of this work can be done in past life regressions, but again, for most people, it's very challenging experience, and it's like very emotionally draining experience to be able to kind of process the past life, but also sort of continue to live the present life. And so this is what I found out, is that like one of my main designs is that I could not only see how they died tragically, but I could also feel and kind of like process it through my body. And that kind of like, it was the same as with my father, like when he died, I started to see all these visions and images and dreams. I couldn't understand what they are. I thought that it's just like sort of my imagination, but later on I of course understood that his soul was channeling to me the exact experience, how it happened and what he felt during that death. And so at first, when I sort of encountered that talent, I was kind of perplexed by it. I didn't know how to apply it, and I also didn't know how to sort of explain to a real human being, this is what I'm seeing and it's real and this is what I'm doing, kind of thing. And it would also kind of like send me into a very dark place, because to be able to process any of the tragic death of the past, I would have to feel it out through my heart, through my being, and sort of like the soul would kind of just relate all of that to me, and I would just immerse into that person and what they felt during their tragic death. And of course, if a woman was hanged or like decapitated or like punished in some other ways through death, that was too much for me to bear. was kind of like a very painful to experience when sort of something like that would happen. And it was also kind of like the feeling of like hopelessness, and just feeling of that I couldn't do anything, and feeling of kind of like how cruel people could be, was also one of the things that kind of like perplexed me. But that's why I continued to find empowerment in that practice as the only way to reconcile with that cruelty towards women in general, and against their oracle nature, is to kind of, if I can at least heal them right now, to heal their souls, I could sort of somehow kind of, I don't know, remove that darkness, and just help them to get empowered, and also just accept the nature of these tragic deaths, as that they are actually supposed to provide empowerment for souls. And I would say that by now I know that by natural design of different souls, by their purpose and the essence, not every soul kind of can endure the tragic death, and not every soul needs a tragic death on their evolutionary path. But some souls specifically do, and especially any kind of souls who deal with energies of death and transformation, any souls who kind of have the purpose of gods or goddesses in this world, they need to endure such deaths to be able to advance on their evolutionary journeys. And the essence of a soul's being god or goddess is that basically they're not created as gods or goddesses. They just had that potential in their design, and through these different tribulations, through these traumas and initiations, they kind of like rise into their full essence, rise into their full power. And specifically sort of, but to do that, they would have to go through traumatic deaths. And so this is something that I needed to accept as unavoidable, because initially when I kind of like saw how Polly died in previous lives, she was kind of like blaming herself. She was saying that I did something wrong, that it was like I could get it avoided. And I was also like on the receiving end of burying her quite young. I was also kind of like couldn't ever accept that she lived that short life, and that when people usually die young, you kind of like have this feeling of like, oh, they could have a full life. But it was actually just a false concept that I discovered, that some souls, they just need, it's not only that they're designed that they would die young anyway. For example, with Polly, it's just how she is, and it's just impossible to avoid, impossible to escape. There is like a limit on her life. In most cases, it was when she died around the age of 27, 28. But the longest, usually she would live around like 45, 50 in other lives. So it was kind of still the way that she was created and the way that she was. And so to be able to accept it, to be able to advance that healing, I need to surrender to that truth of life, to the laws of nature, that this is how things are. Because we kept like sort of thinking, oh, we could change those tragic deaths, we could do something different. It was this curse, but even though the curse was there and Damien kept chasing her, it was also this understanding that she couldn't die differently in all these traumatic instances. And so at certain point, I could, like, doing the past life regressions also opened up this clairvoyance in me, that I could sort of immerse into the images, into any life that I wanted to on my own. But then once we sort of finished the first part of Polly's healing around the spring of 2021, before she surrendered to go into dungeon and to exchange the places with Damien, she was able to channel 3 of her past deaths to me, and it was these kind of like just completely unexpected sessions that I didn't know how to process, but it kind of like helped me understand my design and what it can do for souls. But that was sort of the huge discovery. I was so surprised by them, because in past life regressions we only observed our lives together with Polly that we had from my perspective. But once she started channeling, I could sort of feel the same lives from her perspective, and it was completely different understanding of the complexity of our love, of our emotions, and everything that we experienced. And it was really beneficial for our shared healings, because she could sort of see my past lives in these regressions, but I could see her past lives through these channeling sessions. So in the first one that she did, she showed me the life of Stefania, where the curse was created, and she basically how she committed suicide at the age of 27. And that was the curse created by Damien and Christian Church that forced her to commit that suicide by hanging. And I could experience everything from like the way that the rope was tightening on her neck, the way that she sort of designed that rope in the house, like hanged it, the way that she kind of like got into this like a weird, almost like hysterical state when this curse was initiated, that she could just like couldn't be in white space. It was almost like she had a bipolar an incident where she would like laugh and cry all at the same time, and that sort of led her for that decision to kill herself. And I could sense all of it, how slowly she died and how she kind of like surrendered to it, and then whatever happened after, I just could feel all of it. And I could also see that I can not only experience it all as her, but I could also step away from that moment and just like observe the entire picture and see how the soul would enter death through in that trauma. Then she showed me how Eloise was murdered by in this occult ritual, by stabbed by the knife, and I could feel all of it, whatever she was feeling, right? Like how that knife penetrated the left shoulder, how it was slicing the skin, how the blood was flowing, how Eloise was sort of screaming and crying, all of these emotions from her perspective. And then in the third session, Polly showed me how Thomas Jefferson died, and Polly died from complications of childbirth. So she gave birth to her third child, who died like just shortly after she passed away. And they had this like a strange thing in those times. They didn't understand the design of a woman, so they had this belief that a woman should not breastfeed her child for the first couple of weeks. And what that created is that it would sort of like had these problems with breasts that would start sort of rot almost from inside out, and just had this inflammation because the milk was not released, and sort of this is what led to Polly's death. But before showing that death, Polly also wanted me to channel the first delivery, the delivery of the first baby that Thomas Jefferson had, and that was kind of like a similar session that we had when Polly channeled to me the first day of Jessica's cycle, where I could sort of feel everything that was happening in the womb space. And so I would say that like giving the birth to that stillborn baby that Thomas Jefferson gave birth to during her first pregnancy, I call it like a crown jewel experience of Polly in the female bodies, because it was the most painful experience that she had throughout her entire existence on Earth. And I claim that this is the most painful experience that any human being can have. And so I could feel the complexity of that pain, because it was not only the pain kind of from delivering the baby in itself, it was the pain that the womb knew that this baby is stillborn, and sort of like it would send the messages to the heart and to the head that like you have to also like sort of process emotions related to understanding that this child is dead, and that you have to sort of also have extra strength to be able to deliver that baby, because baby is dead and doesn't help a woman to be born. And so that was the most unusual feeling, is that Paula Jefferson, when she was delivering that first baby, she knew that this baby is already dead, and she kind of like already cried for the grief and cried for this child of not being able to experience life, but also having this grief of like basically carrying this baby to the full term, only to discover that she can't enjoy the blessings of motherhood. And all of these emotions were sort of channeled to me in this intense session, and I like could barely sort of endure all that pain. I later discovered that was kind of just normal practice for like masculine warriors, for different initiates into mystical arts, to men who would go to battlefield, is that they would go into temple space and they would ask priestesses to sort of help them channel the pregnancy of a woman, the delivery of a baby, because that kind of like a pain would sort of empower them to be able to endure anything on their battlefield or in their spiritual battles. And that was kind of when that session ended, I felt it was another initiation into my masculine powers, because I never experienced anything like that, and I could never sort of after that it was sort of much easier to endure any traumatic death or any painful experience that I had, because I sort of felt the deepest pains that a person could have, and sort of this helped me to advance in my practice and helped me to sort of surrender to that talent of being able to see the deaths of others. And then also during the same time, while I was preparing for that and seeing these images and preparing to sort of retrieve Polly from that dungeon, it was also related to us by Damien and by kind of like by our spiritual guides, that part of the healing and part of sort of resolving these past lives was also removing 7 demons from Polly that she accumulated upon these tragic deaths, or from the moments that she was shamed for being a woman. And sort of since Polly has the essence of a soul that can be described as Magdalene of Death, and I would describe a little bit more about how we discovered all of that and what does it mean. The Magdalene souls, they are kind of wired to be goddesses. It means that like they would supposed to be responsible for other souls. Like this is the purpose of being god or goddess, that once you sort of advance on your evolutionary journey to the certain point, once you would experience different pains of a female body or masculine body, once you explore different tragic deaths, then you would be empowered enough to help other souls, to heal them, to advance their journey, to be guides for them, or to be spiritual teachers for them. This is like the idea is that like the souls who had kind of these essences, these higher essences, being placed higher in the hierarchy of all the souls, is that they have obligations and responsibilities to the world and to the nature, to use their talents not only to heal and advance their own essence, but also to kind of like be responsible for others and help them. And of course you can't sort of help others or heal them if you don't know these pains, if you don't understand the intricacies of human experience, and for example, for Polly, understanding the facets of what it is to be a woman and what it means to be shamed and judged as a woman, what it means to be empowered woman. So all these like different variations. And sort of for me, as being, say, spiritual guide of death, I would also can sort of lead people to empowerment and can't explain to them the purpose of this transformation and assist their souls through that, unless I would go myself. I would go through different traumatic deaths or experiences of grief on my own, and this was my entire purpose of this journey. And that's why, for example, my soul was paired with the body of Thomas Jefferson, because he was like the only person that kind of doesn't just make sense. If you look at all of my other lives, he just like completely different from all of my other incarnations, but my soul was specifically paired with him because he was supposed to endure all these tragic deaths of his beloved and kind of like experience grief in all its shades and forms. And that was the purpose why my soul was sort of lived through that vessel. And so once we kind of got that understanding that there are also these 7 demons that just naturally would hunt any woman with Magdalene soul if she would go through her most evolutionary journey, and sort of Polly wasn't her last life and most empowering life, right? Like when she sort of progressed to her highest essence, she was initiated into her full Magdalene essence during the death of Eloise. And that's why sort of Jessica lives that life of being sort of this attractive woman who kind of turns heads of men and kind of summons them, like for her services and for her practices. Is that like she stepped fully into her Magdalene essence through our lovemaking and through the work that we started doing with Polly. So these demons were kind of part of that process, and some of them I basically learned how to remove them in my practice when I'm reviewing the past lives of clients. But at that time it was still kind of like I didn't know that that was my talent, and I didn't even understood that I would need to create the practice for people and like to provide my services and to offer my services to others. At that time it was mainly just kind of like to heal Polly, and I was trying to do whatever my guides would tell me that would advance her healing, or whatever she would ask me to advance her healing. These 7 demons that Magdalene souls kind of encounter on their path, and the similar happens to other souls, like for example the goddess of Martha, the goddess of Mother Mary, and other kind of like similar goddesses. They also have these sort of demonic entities chasing them, and they usually arrive in the place between life and death and in the afterlife. But some of them are placed on women during their lives, and if you sort of read the history, you know how these things happen. All these instances where women are like labeled as witches, the witch trials, they had that purpose, is that to infuse a woman with these demons. And when I kind of like was presented with that idea, I tried to understand what they are, and Damien specifically said that like to be able to seal him and to be able to for Polly to return to her vessel, I would need to eliminate these 7 demons before I would be able to sort of battle him in our ultimate sort of fight in the future. And it was set to occur in the April of 2023. This was the set day that we designed together with Damien and the spirits of the land, that the rules that he agreed upon. So I started to explore the essence of these entities, and basically they're kind of like they can be called as demons of female sins. And there is no such thing as female sin in nature. It's just the corrupt societies, they often, when they need somebody to blame for their corruption and for their malevolence and for the things that go badly in their lives, they need somebody to blame, and they usually blame women. And that was, again, the purpose of the witch trials, is that it was always kind of like, oh, we all have bad lives because these witches cursed us, so we should kill them, and this would sort of like help us to be saved, right? Like this was the life of Stephania, where Polly was persecuted as witch, and where she was labeled as witch, and where she was sort of infused with these demons by the Christian church. And often the case, it was the black magic of Christian church that would create these demons and that would infuse these demons, but it was also kind of like a responsibility of older women who kind of like proclaim themselves to be the righteous enforcers of the morality, of whatever morality was there, and they would always kind of like blame young, tall, and attractive women for being kind of like promiscuous or being witches, because they would be the sort of like, it just was clear envy, of their youth and of their rebelliousness. And if sort of a woman would live in her most empowering essence, in her femininity, she would always bring the retributions and punishments of nature, and that they would be distributed through her, because she would like act as an ambassador of nature to deliver that punishment. But if a woman is sort of like shamed, abused, her sexual pleasures are being denied to her, her voice is being denied to her, when she's sort of like reduced to being an object or just like a slave, right? Like this is where these demons would sort of like arrive into her space and just like be ingrained in her soul. And so by now I kind of like, I just don't have it like as a separate practice. I usually sort of remove these spiritual beings through when I'm reviewing the past lives of each client. But at that time it was sort of happened kind of separately. We tried to heal the past lives through past life regressions and through my meditative states, but we specifically set kind of like practice or sort of dedicated time to be able to sort of remove these beings. And since they are kind of being created in the spiritual world, in the states of between the worlds, in the inside out of our world, in the lower realms, it became kind of evident for Polly that this is the only way to be able to remove them, is that like we need to like travel into place between the worlds, into the place of like a death realm, or into the place of underworld where these beings sort of like naturally exist. And this is how we kind of like could sort of remove them and seal them. And I didn't understand how it would work. I was just like trusting Polly's intuition. I was like basically using my logic and reason and my passionate heart and my love to her, but I didn't have like a direct practices or like how to do that. And it was her who kind of discovered how to do that. And so when we settled, we basically, when Damien presented us with these 7 demons, we kind of like settled the dates for each battle with each demon, and each like sort of the essence of each demon is described in my book. But it's basically like one would be sort of shame sexuality, one would be of indulgence, one would be sort of complex emotions, so like different beings that would suppress different elements of female essence to block her empowerment. And sort of once you sort of accumulate these beings, if a female soul is being born into a female body again, she would be kind of reserved, or she would be sort of she would be afraid to express her true femininity because of these past traumas, right? Like, so they would already impede her, but it would also create the life where she cannot be the most empowered self and can't trust her intuition, can't speak her truth, all of these things. And we also have to understand that this is just the fight against women that's been raging for all the time of existence. There was only brief periods of time where sort of people lived empowering lives, like the highest period of the ancient Egyptian world. That's when it was kind of like balanced. There were other periods of times where the masculinity and femininity was honored with both respect and admiration, and people kind of like knew that by natural design you need both polarities to be able to achieve sort of the more harmonious society and to create the world, the heaven and earth, was only possible through the sacred union and through the empowering sexual healing practices. But in most kind of like in the history that we know, that was kind of the natural thing, is that women were suppressed and denied their natural powers. Their intuition was suppressed, their voice was suppressed, their sexual pleasures were suppressed, their kind of womb guidance and womb wisdom was equally suppressed, because the womb in itself has intelligence and has its own heart and can really empower a woman if she can connect to that. But basically all the expressions of witch trials and different other type of events like that, they had that purpose, and the entire ideology of Christian Church was to destroy female essence and female empowerment, and just like basically reduce a woman to like inferior being, while we all know that women are created superior to men. They have superior talents, they are more kind of like spiritually advanced, and it's easier for them to sort of navigate life because of that, and they have much more blessings and sort of talents upon birth. Most things that like men need to only develop in life, they have the ability to advance and they have the ability to develop all of these things, but they're like not always have them at birth compared to women. And so I would also have to point out that in our present time, the war that's being waged by the ideologues of feminism against female nature and female empowerment is the same manifestation of nature as the witch trials of the past. Is that basically when a society becomes so corrupt and so disillusioned with their essence and kind of like going into a wrong direction, and we clearly can understand that Western societies are on a path of destruction. They are moving towards not the most empowering way of living. They are moving towards a communist and slavery society, and of course, when that happens, people start to be sort of angry at life because they believe that they are in control of life and they can sort of like do whatever they want. And when they lose that control or like perception of that control, they become erratic, they become sort of like destructive, and they start to blame everybody who they can in their troubles. And so right now we kind of like have the same cycle of like we blaming women for all of that, and we denying them their empowerment. And the main sort of like basically this is the expression of creating these demons of female sins by the ideologues of feminism, when they claim that women are born defective, that their bodies are like need pills to be able to be healthy, that women needs to be living in their masculine power to be even accepted by the society. This is just the natural state of, like, say, Canada or United States, and this is basically the same sort of the same process or the same spiritual shackles that the society tries to place upon women, to blame them for the problems in the world, for the corruption of the world. And this is something that kind of occurs right now in our Western world is that all these indoctrinations and all these lies about female nature and the essence of sacred union and masculinity that's being promoted by the ideologues of feminism, they create these demons of female sins, and they lead to all sorts of problems, to female deaths, to problems with their health, to where they've been denied the access to the spiritual empowerment. They were being shamed for trying to heal their spiritual ailments, where they're being shamed of expressing their essence. The punishment that sex workers, for example, experience in the society like Canada or United States, and especially in Canada, all this criminalization and all this social ostracism, they're basically the same expressions of the witch trials, right? Like and again, it's all being promoted by the older women who believe in these nonsensical things, because they want to suppress younger women and they want to sort of destroy them out of envy, out of spite, I don't know out of what, because they wasted their lives or something like that, or they just bitter and angry at men because they never could understand men themselves, and they blame all men for the world that they're living in, which is of course kind of like not true, evidently, because we're both responsible for the state of our world, and it's not that like one polarity does more to destroy than the other. If women would be empowered, it would be completely more harmonious world, because men would just elevate to that purpose, to that status. They would just like naturally advance, just because they would like need to be do that to be able to just like get access to a woman, right? Like, so they would do whatever it needs if a woman would present the condition of the empowerment, rather than just perceiving themselves as being objects or being kind of like just sexual toys or something like that, something that women right now promote actively themselves because of these ideologues of feminism. And so it's all kind of the same sort of expression of the corrupt society. And we kind of like, once we understood all of that, made our arrangements and started to kind of prepare ourselves to this first battle that was scheduled to the end of March. We actually didn't know how to do that, but accidentally, through that kind of intuitive process to just surrendering to life and surrendering to the higher guidance, we were able to understand how to do that, and that led us to creation of my practice and rediscovering the shamanic healing arts of ancient Egypt. And that practice that we developed, or rather kind of rediscovered it, and then we started to develop it to our modern times. And originally this practice is called, in ancient Egypt, it was called the practice of death journey. And when I had another life as a sex worker, I lived as a woman Astarte in the later period of ancient Egyptian civilization, in the times when Christian church kind of like came to destroy it. So once sort of Astarte has retired from her sex work, she was initiated into this oracle priestess, and she received a temple of oracle readings and death journeys, where she became like sort of the main high priestess. And this is where she sort of like started to do this practice of healing souls from the elements of past lives through these death journeys. And right now I'm kind of like trying to get away from that description, even though it's like a literal translation of that practice from ancient Egyptian death journeys, since kind of like people in this culture, they are afraid of that word and they are scared of death for no obvious reasons. I kind of trying to call it right now soul healing journeys. So in its essence, this practice is basically like a soul retrieval practice. It's similar to the work that you can do in past life regressions, but I work directly with the soul of a client. So I'm not even like having a client present when I'm doing this work. I'm just going into their past life directly with their soul and allow soul to channel that life to me, and kind of like, and then I relate all the information to a client after the session. And so we're not only like reviewing the entire life during these death journeys, we also healing the trauma of tragic deaths, and we also then go into the space in between the worlds, sort of in the death realm, where we can remove the demons that's been hunting any soul in their lives, and that sort of help a client to have a more fulfilling life, to be more attuned to their intuition, to be attuned to their spiritual talents in this life, and to kind of like have a soul fully collected. And part of that practice includes that I'm traveling into the world in between the lives, and basically in the death dimension in itself. And the death is just a plane of existence that like just exists in the higher realms, and you can easily access it here and now. It just exists there. And the most accurate description of that death dimension can be found in the TV series Stranger Things. Basically, this entire series is about death journeys and is about the practice that I'm offering. Interestingly, I discovered this practice before I discovered this TV series, but interestingly and coincidentally, 11, who is the main shaman in this TV series, who sort of invented this practice and who trains others how to sort of live in the world, how to navigate in the world of death, or how in the TV series it's called the Upside Down. She has the same practice, how she accessed that world as me, sort of like the sensory deprivation technique, and using the water as the conduit, as sort of like a space that sort of advances the channel of communication and empowers it. That's the essence of the water. And kind of I discovered this practice before I sort of saw the TV show, but then when I sort of discovered the TV show, 11 kind of also became one of our teachers who helped us to understand and navigate that world. And the mainly sort of in the TV series, they mainly show the first plane of death, and it's where most souls end up if they lived sort of normal life and they didn't sort of lie to themselves, or they didn't punish themselves, or didn't die tragically, and didn't betray themselves. But I am mainly working in the second level of death, and that level of death was clearly described by the ancient Egyptians, and that's where the main sort of healing happens. This is the place where the Temple of Isis is situated, and this is the place where soul enters and their heart is weighted on the scale of Mat against the feather, and if their heart is sort of like heavier, then they enter into the second level of death, and this is where sort of the gods of death, the judges of death, can provide the most accurate punishment for a soul depending on their sort of incoming evidence and whatever they bring to the soul. This is where sort of the boat of Anubis travels through the river of death, and sort of when I review the past life of a client with their soul, and when the soul channels me entire life, I kind of then gather the entire information and try to understand the lessons, and kind of like try to debrief it with the soul themselves and what they gained from that life, why they chose that life, why they think that they sort of made mistakes. And then we go back to the judges of death, to Osiris mainly, who is the main judge of death, and he's like sort of living this temple of Isis. And this is where I sort of present the case of a soul, and I act as if I'm kind of a spiritual defense attorney to the soul, and I can rewrite the contracts, and I can rewrite the traumas almost, and just like elevate that trauma through that. And so then in the result of that, the person would, the real person in this life, they would be removed from that spiritual baggage, and they would feel more empowered in their daily life, and they would have more fulfilling life, feeling their intuition more, just not having these random anxieties and attacks. And when eventually I discovered the life of Astarte, I could also channel her guidance and her understanding of these death journeys and how to do this work in the most empowering way. And then later on, we also could channel the guidance of my past life as Astarte. When I kind of explored that life, probably around 18 months after I started to do this practice, I could channel all of her guidance and all of her understanding of the death journeys and how to do them properly. And that kind of like immediately elevated my my practice to another level, and I could like connect to her talents and be able to sort of summon them to myself, and that just like rapidly advanced everything that I was doing. But even then, I was just convinced that this practice would only exist to heal me and my closest soulmates. I eventually used this practice to heal Veronica. I eventually used this practice to heal Brian, and to heal all my other soulmates that I found on the lands of Vancouver. And then after I finished this work, my spiritual guides and the spirits of seashelled waters and lands also told me that this is the entire idea behind developing this practice, is that I should offer it to people, to anyone who sort of like needs it. And right now I sort of created my offerings, and this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I know the results are incredibly effective. And we can heal in one death journey what usually takes like 3 to 5 hypnotherapy sessions to achieve. But even with that, sometimes there's certain things that you can't sort of heal, and especially the ability to be able to travel into between the worlds of existence and to the death plane, where we can renegotiate the contracts. This is something very unique and not really available just among the practitioners. So I strongly believe in this practice, and I know why I was sort of guided to establish it. And it was also interesting that how slowly I was rediscovering the elements of this practice and how it felt natural to me. Initially it was just kind of Paula's intuition, and she just knew that this demon could only be expelled in the world between lives, or in like in this bardo state, or in a state of death. We didn't have the words at that time. And so when the date of this first battle came, I found myself sort of I didn't know how it would occur, and I was like taking the shower after sort of immersing myself into past life of Eloise. And once we sort of cleared it out, I was just standing there under the stream of water, and I'm seeing this like demon in front of me, and he just like started to punch me. And even though I hit back, he continued to sort of like destroy me, and his strength was far more superior than mine, and I didn't know how to understand what he was doing or how could combat it. And even though I sort of was resilient at first, then after a series of punches, I found myself lying in the bathtub with the water like sort of showering over me, and I was like in this fetal position looking down, and I actually lost consciousness at that time. And then I started to see how my soul sort of elevates from the body, and so I started to feel that my body is actually dead. So my body stopped like its normal functions, and it just sort of kept very limited heartbeat and some subtle breathing, but it was sort of this kind of like a state where you can actually not return, because you already kind of like separated from it, And that's the idea behind this practice, is that you need to have the awareness of both that death dimension and whatever soul is showing you, but also have the awareness that your body is alive, even though it has sort of limited functions. But that was actually the real death, and I kind of like just elevated from my body together with Polly, and then we found ourselves in this like a place in between the worlds. And I started to go through like different memories and different sort of events of that life of Eloise and Camilla to sort of pinpoint where that demon appeared. And we were able to sort of find him and lock him and remove him in that between states and just dispel him into lower realm. But then it was also sort of this, because when you, in the process of death, there is also an element of confusion and illusions, is that you feel that whatever you experience is actually real while your body is already dead. This is something that like just naturally occurs to souls, and it like takes time for them to be able to understand that they're dead. That's why like in all of the human history, in most empowering civilizations, it was also always known that there should be a sitter or a guide with the person when they die for the 3 days after their death, to sort of help them, guide them through these planes, and explain to them that they actually not living the physical life. This is the essence, for example, of Tibetan Book of Death. This is essence of many other different cultures that do this kind of like a work in different ways. I discovered that the most important part is to spend 36 hours. The first 36 hours are the most crucial ones. 3 days is not always manageable for everybody, but 36 hours is something that's quite achievable, and that helps kind of like a soul to settle into that space. And so I was literally in between the states, and even though we locked that demon, and kind of like dismantled him, I could still couldn't return back into my body. And it was interesting that at the same time, we kind of like, Polly was praying for me, and she was like sort of praying for angels and for spiritual beings, and I was also like sort of praying for our guides to assist us. And it was interesting that at the same time, Veronica was called to come into a meditative state, and she was seeing this dream of like me being dead, and she basically was trying to help me, and that allowed me to return back into the body. This is like something that's I discovered then later on in my practice, is that if I have this like a soul connection or a connection with another or love to another, then I was able to return into the body very quickly. And so I returned back into my body, just lying there. There was like already the water was hot, and it was sort of like this mist in the bathroom. It was this like almost like a foggy thing because of the hot water, and I kind of like started to gain consciousness, and then I started to feel that this entire being is inside of me, and I can't sort of get him out. And I was like trying to puke, and there was like these dead snakes and spiders that started to come out of me, and they were like pieces of this being. And then I was also needed to sort of dispose and crack him into like limbs and different elements, and just like throw them out of my body one after one. And there was also like the vision of the dark black blood like streaming into the in my bathtub. And sort of like this is how that that scene occurred. And slowly after that, Polly was like, okay, we discovered something very unique, and there is like a different practice. Definitely there is some kind of like a practice that you can do that will help me on my path to be able to remove all these demons. We kind of understood that the following demons would be needed to process in the same kind of like setting, in the same way. But then slowly I started to understand that this is how I do this practice, and this is how I can access both the previous life of a client and the world in between the lives and the death realm, is that I would sort of immerse myself into bathtub filled with water with no lights and with earplugs into my ears, and just like being submerged in water with the ears as well, just having nose and my mouth above the water. And then I would able to sort of go into the sensory deprivation trance, and that would allow me to travel into the death realm and do this work. And sort of slowly, piece by piece, we were starting to add different elements to that practice, and to kind of like trying to understand how it works. But it was interesting that I felt very natural in that world, and it was very intuitive for me to go there, to die and return. And it's kind of like this practice of basically dying for somebody else's sins, right? Like you kind of you just surrender your life to be able to go in this place in between the lives, to be able to remove the demons that were placed upon women, on the female souls, and kind of like return back unharmed. And this practice is called, in ancient Egypt, it was called the art of resurrection. And this is what I started, practiced, right? And this is something that kind of I discovered that this is one of my natural shamanic talents, is to just experience art of resurrection in this way. The other very interesting reference point, I would say that there is also a TV series called Leftovers, and in this TV series it's the same sort of thing, is that the main shaman Kevin is slowly understanding that he can travel to death, and through that he could be able to remove the demons of his beloved, and like the demons that were hunting humanity. And slowly, with all these references, we kind of like started to add element to that. And eventually we arrived to Astarte's life, and were able to channel her guidance. And before discovering Astarte's life, it took me like 20-30 minutes to be able to like fully surrender my body and to travel into death realm. But after I was able to channel her talents, I could travel into death realm just in a matter of seconds. I found this like a portal in my being, in my mind, in my essence, that just takes me there, and I don't need to like have any preparations. I just need to have the intention and the will and the sort of inner strength to be able to do that. But from that moment on, it just like became started to like shaped into its own thing. This practice was always kind of the thing that Polly needed, and that I just like followed her guidance. But it was incredible how we could both, since we're both kind of like spiritual guides of death, how fast we could advance in it, because we were able to like exchange ideas, and we were doing all of that together. And I was actually quite afraid in the beginning to go into these death states, because of how painful it was, because of the images that I was seeing, and because I was like just scared of that world and the energies. But Polly was never scared, and she was kind of like, no, let's do another one. So she started to initiate these sessions for other people, and we started to ask more people to kind of like if they would volunteer for us. And that we eventually kind of just not only rediscovered it from ancient Egypt, but I also were able to kind of advance and improve it based on our current world, based on our understanding of the soul's design and essence, based on different other spiritual teachings of our present times, and just knowing our present world, it just needed to be adjusted in different ways. To mainly just address these demons of female domination, of female sins that society keeps placing on our women, and keeps shaming them for their natural design, and trying to suppress their oracle visions, trying to suppress their female empowerment and womb space. So this is the story of my practice, and this is the end of the episode 9, and I hope to see you in the following episodes.